Welcome back to yet another Sunday school lesson. Did you miss them? So now we're looking at 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. 4 separate books. The lesson is titled, Be Thou an Example of the Believers. To start out with, I just want to point out that Philemon is not a type of Pokemon, nor does it mean love of Pokemon. Very, very confusing name there. No, but we'll kind of get into this and the lesson in the story. So this group of letters is interesting just simply because they are written not to a congregation or group of people, but it's very personal advice given to 3 different people. And so it has much more of a personal touch of kind of like a private counsel between people. And so it makes for very interesting reading, I think. Just it feels much more personal than previous lessons have been given. So Timothy and Titus. So first object of the lesson is to kind of identify who they were. So they had served with Paul on some of his missionary journeys, according to the lesson, and they earned his respect and trust. And Timothy was later called to be a church leader in Ephesus, and Titus was called as a leader in Crete. So, they were doing pretty well. I believe both Titus and Timothy are referred to by Paul as sons. So I don't know if that means that they were literally Paul's sons. I know of no doctrine that says, or no reference that says they were literally his sons, or whether he had such great affection for them that he thought of them as his sons. Either way, I think that's a very good compliment to both of these men, and he gave them good advice and good leadership. So the first topic is dealing really with Timothy and saying, if I am an example of the believers, I can lead others to the Savior and his gospel. And that was kind of advice given to Timothy. Timothy was, relatively young. He was put into a position of authority at a young age. And that sometimes happens, and no matter where you are, you might be put into a position of authority. So what do you do with that? And it really doesn't matter your age, your anything like that. You can, if you are an example of the believers, then you can lead others to the Savior and his gospel. I mean, it's right there in the title. But yes, that's kind of the best advice. No matter how old you are, no matter how young you are, if you're an example of the believers. And, let's take this a little bit further. No matter what position you hold, no matter what title you hold, or even what title you don't hold, you can still be an example to the believers. And you can lead people to Christ because of your example. There's a part in the Book of Mormon where, yes, it was Alma. It took me a second to remember who was giving this advice. Alma, the younger, if you want to get really technical, his father's name was Alma as well, but he had taken his sons on a missionary service, and one of his sons had not behaved very well. In fact, he went out and did some pretty, stuff you wouldn't expect a missionary to do, going after prostitutes and, things like that. And one of the things he told his son was that when the people saw how you behaved, they would no longer listen to what I had to say. So his son, through his bad example, made it impossible for Alma, who was, a very good man at this point, a very good teacher, leader, missionary. It made it impossible for him to teach about Christ, about the gospel. And so, yes, if we are an example of believers, then we will lead people to Christ. If we're not an example of believers, if we are a bad example, for instance, we'll lead people away from Christ. When I was a missionary, years and years and years ago, I'm so old, one of the things that would happen that I came across more and more often was people, would explain to me, one of the things that people do is explain to you why your beliefs are wrong and theirs are right. You come to expect that, but one of the things I heard over and over again was them saying, well, I once knew a member of your church and they acted this way, so your church must be wrong. I would literally get that statement. It wasn't just, a comparison. It's like, or how can I listen to you if you've, if you guys behave this way. It was literally, your church is wrong because one member of your church did something like this. And it is very true. If we're not examples of believers, we are examples of non-believers, of non-belief. We lead people away from Christ. So, and even in situations where, where we wouldn't think we'd have to be good examples, like if we're just walking down the street, if we're just doing something, it's, we should still be examples. We shouldn't, just because, we're alone or nobody knows who we are, we shouldn't just go out and do something bad just because. We're always an example, no matter where we are or what we do. And, so that's, I think, what that advice means. So, no matter what position you're in, no matter who you are, where you are an example of believers to somebody. And, behave that way, or basically be on your best behavior always. So anyway, the next part of the lesson is, God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Now, what's noted in the lesson is that 2 Timothy is believed to be the last letter that Paul wrote. I think there's some question about that, but that happens on that. So it seems to indicate that Paul knew his time on earth was coming to an end. He was imprisoned at this point, and he knew that execution could not be far away, and the letters reflect that. And it's really interesting how he talked to Timothy about that, about him doing that. And this has the I've fought the good fight. I can't remember the exact quote, but I think it's like, I've lived my life, I've fought the good fight, and and now it is over. And that's essentially, it's giving you confidence. When you're in that position, if you're ever in that position, it's about to be over and stuff like that. How you act and how you react to that is just, it is incredible, and it can shape everything around you. And it's certainly, I think, for Timothy, knowing that Paul was comfortable going to his death, knowing that he had done the best he could, I think was a terrific blessing for him. It was just a confirmation of everything he believed in, and he was comforted by that fact. And I think this actually can reflect on all sorts of situations, not just spiritual ones, not just things as dramatic as death. I think, when we are a good sport about, say, losing, if we're playing a game and we lose, and we be a good sport about it, shake the hands of the people, just be happy for those who won instead of being really miserable that we lost, that can affect kind of how things are perceived and how things are done. And that when we aren't good losers, when we're just really super upset that all this bad stuff has happened to us, then that affects people too. And it makes it harder to feel, confident or happy. Other people feel happy in victory. Not going to name names, but I just, stuff that pops into my head. Excuse me. There was a sporting event where a younger person was facing off against the older person, and the younger person actually beat the older person. The younger person, had presumably watched the sport for years and had, admiration for the older person who had been the champion, and who they finally, after a lot of effort, managed to win. And instead of, giving like this congratulations speech, instead of being super nice, this person just lost their temper. They got mad. They, yelled at the referees. They, did all this stuff and behaved, like a five-year-old child who's, can't have his favorite sweetie. I mean, that was essentially how they behaved. And, and I remember just watching the face of the person who had won, just looking, this young lady looked and, very guilty and very upset at having, worked hard and gained a victory. So instead of, people celebrating what should have been a good victory, should have been a success after, a lot of hard work, suddenly is in a position of feeling horrible and guilty because the person who won was not a good sport about it. Or the person who lost was not a good sport about losing. And, it's how we behave, how we handle adversity that really determines the quality of who we are. Do we handle it like Paul did, where he said, I know my time is short, it's at hand, and I've done my best. It's now in God's hands. Or do we just lose our temper and yell at the referees, blame everybody but ourselves, and just, get really super upset and, kind of steal the attention from the victory of someone else? And I think that harks back into what this lesson is titled, Be Thou an Example of Believers. Are you a good example? A good representation of whatever you're doing? Be it a sport, be it life and death, be it just a member of the church. So, yep, we're going to move on from there. Just give you something to think about. That's your homework for the night. Think about that. People keep shooting other people up on the road here. I don't know why. Happens sometimes in this game. I could be a poor sport about it and say, ugh, but I'm not. I'm just going to continue my peaceful Sunday walk. Ooh. See, if I'd been a poor sport, I would have missed this awesome umbrella. It landed perfectly. Look at that. That's amazing. So you never know what sort of blessings you're going to get for being a good sport. And sometimes just, something fun like an umbrella like that will come your way. You never know. So, anyway, moving on to the lesson. So, if we live the gospel, that will provide safety. It will provide safety and security from the spiritual dangers that are occurring nowadays, in the last days, as the lesson calls them. And, we are protected, spiritually protected in these, the perils that are mentioned. And, nowadays we have so many ways of communication. And while that's great, we can get spiritual messages from people and to people a lot easier, a lot better. What often happens is that we can also get sin a lot easier than before. And, we have all these adverse temptations, all these bad things, these sins, these temptations that are constantly, coming our way. We're seeing all these, enticements to do that which is wrong. And we have them coming at us faster and faster nowadays. Social media is a great, great tool. But like all tools, it can be used for good or for evil. It's like a knife. A knife, I work as a janitor. I carry a knife simply because it's one of the most useful tools I can carry. Just a little pocket knife. I can use it to break down boxes. I can use it to, open up containers that I need to and things like that. It's pretty much an invaluable tool that I carry with me because it's a useful tool. I know quite a few people who carry pocket knives, and most of them use the knives a lot in their business, in their work. It's one of the best tools you can use. It's also a tool that can be used to murder someone. You can use it to hurt someone. You can use it to cause as much damage and pain, not just on someone else, but on yourself. Self-mutilation, cutting yourself. You can use a knife for all of these things. It's simply a tool. It doesn't have moral choice. It doesn't choose how it's going to be used. And social media is the exact same way. It's a tool. It just depends on what you use it for. Are you using social media to help other people? Are you using it to see the best in your fellow people? Are you using it, to present the best viewpoints, the best options? Are you using it to communicate and help other people? I think I said that already, but it's an important point in noting. Or are you using it for its worst uses, the worst enticements, the worst ideas or concepts to hurt other people? it can be used either way, and it's really down to you how you use it. But, if you use it with a mind towards, the gospel, towards what Christ taught, then that will protect you while you use this tool. It's like taking a knife safety class. You learn, just simple safety measures with a knife, and, you considerably lessen the chances are that you'll cut yourself. And, yeah, are you doing that? Are you sticking with the gospel while you do social media? And it's a lot of times, yeah, social media is great. It's like, want a little bit of break. Let me get back into the real world. And you go on Twitter, which is not the real world, just to let you know. So, yeah, so if you just, like I said, yes, we often use social media to get away from spiritual things just because we need a break. But if we have the spiritual things in our minds, in the back of our heads, even when we're taking a break from spiritual things, they will still be there and to protect us and to keep us safe there. So that's the important bit about that in the lesson. So, just continuing the lesson, we're going to move on from Titus and Timothy to Philemon. And there's actually a pretty interesting little blurb here in the story about who Philemon was. He was a Christian who'd been converted to the gospel by Paul. And he had owned a slave, a man named Onesimus. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'm sure I'm not. You can look him up. It's one sim us is how it's spelled. And yeah, anyway, this slave Onesimus had escaped from slavery and later had met Paul, and then the slave himself was converted to Christianity. And so the letter that Paul sends to Philemon was to kind of encourage Philemon to not really, to not think of Onesimus as a lesser person, as was kind of the common belief. Slaves are not as good of a person as a, citizen is. That's the typical mentality of slave owners. It's like he's not as good as I am. Nah. And so Paul was encouraging Philemon to not think in those terms, to not think of him as less than a human being. And if he felt any sort of residual anger or hatred, Paul himself would pay for that. Would pay for what was owed. Basically, would be paid by Paul, and if there was a debt owed there, to attribute it to Paul. If there was, anger over this debt, attribute the debt to Paul, and Paul would pay for it. And it's all about like kindness towards other people and treating other people as if they were equal, even if you're in a position where you think someone is not as equal as you are, for whatever reason. Think of them as equal, and that's kind of the whole point about Christianity and the message that Christ brought, is that we are all equal. We're all the same. It doesn't matter what our skin color is, doesn't matter what our ancestry is, doesn't matter what religion we belong to, doesn't matter what our sexuality is, doesn't matter any of the stuff that you turn on the news and you listen to them. They tell you all these things matter: skin color and race and ancestry and sexual orientation. All that stuff they tell you is so important and matters a lot. It doesn't. We're all the same. Underneath all that stuff, we're all just the same, and we should treat others the same way, with the same amount of kindness and love and forgiveness that we treat everyone else. And even if we believe that someone is committing a sin, we shouldn't punish them for committing a sin. That's, on them, and if there's punishment needed, God will punish them. It's not our job to punish them, and we really shouldn't punish them. But we should love them just the same. That's our job. Love everyone. Even the ones who are hard to love. And the next point in the lesson is basically just that we forgive one another. If we follow Christ, we forgive each other. Even that really annoying person who always sits behind you and is really loud and obnoxious, during sacrament meeting, during, the sermon, during whatever at church, we still forgive them. That's what we do, because we love everyone. So there's a couple of smaller points that are addressed towards the end of the lesson, just as I didn't see that guy there. Just as a just points of study that we could look into. So the first one is about Paul's counsel to women. Now, I actually had a conversation with someone a while back who honestly and fervently believed that this counsel, what Paul was essentially saying, was that all women need to sit down and shut up and just listen to men. And I had to explain to him, no, that's not what he meant by it. This means this means that. But, what the lesson itself focuses on is Paul's advice, not in general about it, but about apparel, about what you wear and what you dress, how you dress as. And it does point out that a lot of his advice isn't applicable nowadays because it was a different time, a different culture, different people, and they had different modes and methods of dressing. But the basic advice, which was if we adorn ourselves with good works, that is what we need to do. Whether we're men, whether we're women, we need to adorn ourselves. We need to wear good works. And, everything else will kind of sort itself out. If we're about doing good, that will adorn us. That will, keep us safe and protect us. And, clothing is ultimate. This entire lesson seems to be about protecting ourselves, but clothing is just another way to protect ourselves. I mean, it keeps us warm when it gets too cold out. It cools us down. It keeps the sun from burning us when it gets too hot out. It's there for our protection, basically. And we could throw it away, join a nudist colony, but, we'd be open to the elements. I mean, and we would, if the weather turns, if a sudden storm brews up, say, at a nudist colony, I imagine most people who are nudists, get some clothes on pretty darn quickly because they need to protect themselves. And that's what our clothes do. And if what we adorn ourselves with, if the clothes we wear are our good works, then that's, that's another way to keep ourselves safe from the harms of the world. And I think how we dress, what we wear, reflects who we are. I have gotten into a habit in recent years of just finding just cool, obscure type logos to wear, to have on t-shirts that I wear. And, I've had numerous different types of logos and different things. Most of them are just in references, meaning references that unless you're familiar with something, you're not going to get. Wearing a Squirrel Girl shirt is not going to be immediately recognizable by everyone else. But for people who wear it, they'll be like, oh, you like this character. I like this character too. And, that's, in a certain way, that's how I kind of give a nod to and find other people who like some of the same stuff I like. And, but I'm also very careful about what I choose. I mean, is it appropriate for me to wear the image that appears on the shirt? Is it inappropriate in any way? Is that inappropriateness, is it only going to be inappropriate to certain people that, I really don't buy? I mean, I'm not actively looking to offend people, but is it going to, if somebody's going to be easily offended by what I wear, is it going to offend easily offended people? At that point, I just say, well, anything I wear might offend easily offended people. But if it's going to be like, am I going to say, is it, excuse me, let me put this another way. I'm not expressing myself very well. If it's something that I wear in front of, say, my grandfather, would he be upset that I was wearing that? Would he be, like, disappointed in me that I'm wearing that? Or would he look at it and say, oh, what is that? I don't get that. Oh, okay, you've explained it to me. Thank you. And I think we need to look at our clothing and say, is this, have I adorned myself with good works? Have I adorned myself with good clothing that, I could say, meet the Savior in? And, would he look at it and have a little smile on his face then saying, yeah, most people won't get that reference, but I get the reference, I totally get you? Or would he be like, just a little bit disappointed that we're wearing that sort of clothing around him. And I think that's a literal and metaphorical look at adorning ourselves with good works there. Feels like I went off on a tangent there, but for me personally, it's very important. So, also, 1 Timothy 6, 7 through 12 includes probably the most misquoted section in both the Old and New Testament, which was the misquotation of this is money is the root of all evil. The reason it's a misquotation is they leave off the first part of that, which is the love of money is the root of all evil. So money itself isn't actually evil. It's, a means to an end. But love of money, that's the root of all evil. See, if we just love money, if we love money, we become a bit like Ebenezer Scrooge, who's, that was his entire thing, was collecting as much money as possible. He lived, if you read the book, and I think this is portrayed in a lot of the movies as well, he lived incredibly frugally. He had barely enough fire for his, to heat his room to keep him alive. In the middle of winter, he ate very sparingly. He just, kept and preserved his money, as much money as he possibly could. And he never really used the money for anything. He just kept it and saved it, which, frugally speaking, is a good thing. But it wasn't, for frugality's sake that he kept it, but because he just loved money. He just loved having the money. And if you go back over that entire story of A Christmas Carol, you'll find that this same love of money ruined a good chunk of his life. Was ruined because he had this, obsession and love with making more and more money and just becoming richer and richer. And when he had the money, he didn't do anything with it. He didn't make his life easier. He didn't, do anything. He didn't help people with it. He didn't help himself with it. He just hoarded it. And so that's why the love of money is the root of all evil. Is that when we, just hoard all our substances, keep it to ourselves, don't share it with anyone else, but almost even worse than that is that we don't use it for ourselves either. We just hold it back and keep it because we must keep our money. We must hoard all of our possessions and everything. We can't share or show them with anyone else. One of the there's an interesting story about a young boy visiting a collector, and this collector has collected just mint condition, some of the best toys ever made. Just mint condition. They're still in their original packaging and wrapping, and the collector's proudly showing it off, and the little boy's really interested in talking about it and looking at it, and finally the little boy asks the important question, which is, if it's in its wrapping, how do you play with it? And the man says, well, you don't. You just keep it in the wrapping. That's why it's worth so much. It's still in its original packaging. The kid says, yeah, I get that, but you mean you don't play with it? And the guy's like, no, you don't play with it. You just keep it where it is and look at it. And then the kid thinks for a second and says, then what good is it? And that's kind of the whole point. That's why the love of money is the root of all evil. Because it doesn't serve any good if we just tuck it away and keep it back from people. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't, save or be frugal in our spendings and in how we spend our money. There's a happy medium between, frugally saving and investing and hoarding our money. There's a lovely happy medium there, which is, we save our money, but we also don't hoard it away. So, anyway, wanted to cover that in the lesson, and it seems like I have covered pretty much most all of the lesson. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about my t-shirt selections. Like and subscribe if you like this. I will see you in the next video. Bye.